Hello, friends around the world. My name is Brandon Neighbor. Welcome to the Naberhood, where we have switched on, fun discussions with some of the most brilliant, successful, experienced, talented, and highly skilled sales and marketing minds on the planet from the world's fastest growing companies. Enjoy. Hey, everybody. Today we've got Daniel Sanchez-Grant on the show, affectionately known as DSG. He leads strategic sales at Envision. Envision's raised $350 million in capital, worth $1.9 billion valuation, a unicorn. They're a digital product design platform used to make the world's best customer experiences. He's part of the international leadership team there, responsible for growing Envision's business outside of North America, and he leads a group of senior sales pros who are fully distributed across Europe. Previous leadership experience includes launching a cloud technology business in the HR/culture space called Runway, as well as several years at LinkedIn, 6 years to be precise, where they IPO'd and then were acquired by Microsoft for $27 billion in the acquisition. He was there from pre-IPO startup stage to the acquisition by Microsoft. Here we go. DSG, awesome to have you on the show, man. Thank you so much for taking the time to come hang out with me for a little while.
Neighbor, always a pleasure. Looking forward to the conversation.
Cheers, buddy. You're coming from London today. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. Based out of the WeWork on Chancery Lane.
Chancery Lane. Write it down, everybody. Put it on your Google map. What I want to do is go into a little bit of your background, probably personally first, and then we'll jump into professional. And then we'll hop into some of your superpowers and some of the things you've observed as well as lived and executed over multiple businesses, multiple roles. And I think that people are really lucky to hear from you today, which is great.
Awesome.
Cool. Why don't we start with you growing up a little bit personally? So I know that you've been mostly London through and through, which is a bit ironic considering how much you are all over the world for snowboarding, traveling with family, traveling with the partner, traveling by yourself, traveling with friends, and all the global businesses and roles you've had. It's pretty amazing that you've been almost always in London. Give us maybe 5 minutes or so on, what DSG, Daniel Sanchez-Grant, was like growing up and what your childhood was like.
Sure. So I guess come from an entrepreneurial background. My mum was a very successful kind of businesswoman, set up a company in the recruitment industry and went on to kind of build that during a time where recruitment and particularly the kind of agency market in the UK was a really successful kind of industry. And so kind of grew up in an environment where high work ethic, a successful achieving kind of environment, 2 older sisters who, again, in their own right, are very successful individuals doing different careers. And so grew up kind of in and around London, actually from a place called Staines, probably most famous for Ali G of all things.
Oh, amazing. Amazing.
Yeah, he's definitely become synonymous with the place that I kind of grew up. So that's quite funny. But so look, spent a bunch of time there. Left school relatively young and joined actually the family business. Spent 4 years in that business, joined with the idea of being there for a couple of weeks to help out during the summer and fell in love with the whole environment. And 4 years later was still there and going strong. And so I think that was a huge kind of part of shaping my professional perspective and kind of work ethic and just love of like being in a kind of entrepreneurial environment and building companies. And so, yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Very cool. And what were your set of responsibilities in that business?
I think, to be honest, like there wasn't anything that wasn't like when you're building a company at that kind of stage. I mean, when I joined, it was like 4 people in a branch environment in a place called Teddington.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't really have a set of responsibilities, right? Like whether it's fixing the printer or like going and covering a kind of temporary assignment on reception for one of your clients, or like the role was so varied from that point of view. And therefore it just gives you a flavor of all aspects of business, from like payroll to customer service to candidate management, business development. Like From that point of view, it was super fun. So in the early phase, I was like 17, totally clueless, probably more of a hindrance than a kind of help to a lot of the talented people that I kind of worked with during that time. But as I got exposure to different ways of working, and there was just like a small group, but such a talented, diverse group within that environment, like such different styles amongst the 3 or 4 consultants that we started with, that as an early career professional, just really inspiring and energizing exposure at a young age. So like how to run a business, how to service customers, how to think about like building teams and a great culture. And it was a lot of fun. So yeah, that was the kind of early part. Spent 4 years there, and I look back with nothing but kind of fond memories of that experience. And I think also like it being a family thing, I think it brings a different level of kind of purpose to like the feeling that you get from like building stuff and accomplishing things on a day-to-day basis that I think is hard to replicate in other types of environments. So
yep, very cool, very cool. And that's LPR, correct?
Yeah, it was Litchfield's Personnel and Recruitment, it was called. Started in Teddington and then grew to be like multiple branches and, 20 to 30 full-time staff at one point, and, hundreds of people working on a temporary kind of basis that we were providing to customers. So yeah, that was a fun ride.
Cool. Very good. Nice one. And you went through the roles and ranks to general manager of that business. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, my mum at the time got to a point where she'd stepped back from the business. It was doing really well and had kind of gone into like an early retirement. And so me and a bunch of people were kind of running different branches, different customers at that time. And so, yeah, it was exciting, right? Like, got to a point where I was fairly integral into kind of the running of that company. And obviously at like 20, 21 years old, like that's a lot of really good experience quite early into, how to drive a company and how to make sure that people are happy and all of that kind of good stuff.
I want to go off the script of some of these tech businesses that you've worked for to talk about this just for a minute here. So as a young professional, there's a lot of young managers in tech companies and a lot of young leaders in tech companies because oftentimes they'll promote internally for a lot of reasons, but sometimes it's just what they've always done. Sometimes it's because of speed. Sometimes it's because they have brilliant people and they're just the best people for that role. But there's a lot of young leaders and young managers. For someone that is a young manager, a young leader that is either managing or leading people that are older than them or more experienced than them, that sounds like something you had to do when you're relatively young. Is there any sort of mindset or way that you think about or set of advice that you've given to other people that are in the same scenario so that they can alleviate confidence concerns or, not overthink it? Any advice or mindset that you can deliver to folks that are in the same scenario?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is it's like totally okay not to have all the answers, right? Like if I think about all of the teams that I have and have managed like the best teams, I'm surrounded by people even today who are like much better than me at a whole bunch of things. And I absolutely love that. And so I think just firstly, acknowledging that you're always going to be running teams where there's people who have a different point of view, more experience, a better skill set. And I think it's really about like embracing that and not being afraid of it. And so I guess that first thing is like, that's okay. And, think about what it is that you do really well and play to those strengths. And then think about like, how do you harness the skills of others around you to make sure that you're benefiting from that kind of collective experience. So yeah, I'd say that would be one of the core things for me. And also just like embracing the fact that you're always, if you're going to build great teams, you're going to be surrounded by people like that all the time. And that's something to be excited about, not afraid of.
That makes sense.
And I also think like, just because someone's on your team, like be vulnerable, right? If there's something that they do really, really well, like doesn't mean you can't go and talk to them about like how they do it and what they've done to improve that skill. And, showing that interest and recognizing what someone is really strong at and then using that as a conversation to like help me improve on this thing, I think can be a really great experience when you're managing people, and definitely brings those, two individuals having that type of engagement like closer together.
Cool. That's great. Thanks so much, DSG. And then let's move on to CEB. So you went from LPR to CEB. Tell us about that jump and tell us about what you're up to there.
Yeah, sure. So CEB was actually SHL at the time, which were kind of talent management technology services provider. They specialized in psychometric assessments, so ability tests, psychometric tests. And they were actually one of my customers at LPR at the time. And so we were recruiting for salespeople who interestingly had like a psychology background. This was an organization that was a market leader in occupational psychology and like how to really get the best of your talent across the entire kind of life cycle of an employee. And so I was like really fascinated by them at the time because I'd spent 4 years in this kind of recruitment marketplace trying to find companies just like great people like great companies. And what SHL really specialized in is like, how do you bring science to that process and give companies tools that enable you to identify like behavioral traits and preferences and strengths and weaknesses. And as I got to know them as a customer, I was at this kind of interesting kind of crossroads in my career where I've like been working with the family business for like 4 years. It's like 17 when I started. 4 years later, it's like, do I want to be running this forever, or like, are there other things that I need to go and do to like test myself, expand my skills? And so, as you can imagine, like, my mum is still like one of my closest friends and like mentors, but like tough conversations to have with someone who, like, I can imagine on a selfish level is like, I don't want you to go, but then like obviously as her son was super supportive and me kind of progressing and exploring my career. And so joined SHL in like an inside sales role and progressed fairly quickly into like enterprise field-based sales for them, working with large kind of FTSE 100 companies and helping them with things like leadership development and employee development, talent management, recruitment, and how they used assessments and services as part of that mix. And so really great experience. Like one thing I really took from there is like value-based selling, like how to really orientate your conversation around the customer and the challenges that they face, and how to build more solution-orientated type agreements. So yeah, it was an awesome experience. Worked with some really good people that I'm still in touch with today. And it was a super tough decision to leave there, to be honest.
Yeah, I bet. You have so many good experiences, it sounds like, within that particular role. When you moved to LinkedIn, tell us about that jump as well.
Yeah, it was interesting. So I was actually at Wembley Football Stadium for an event that I think like a applicant tracking system provider was running, and was there in my kind of SHL capacity with clients. And great day. Like, I was actually sent there as part of like a development opportunity, and I just remember like the overall content of the speakers was great, but at the end of the day, a chap called Ariel Eckstein did like a keynote at the time. I think it's like 2010 on this platform called LinkedIn. And
that's so early. So early.
Yeah, it was new at the time, and I think social media still back then was a little bit kind of misunderstood, particularly in kind of businesses. Everyone was like, "How do we understand social media?" And so, Ariel did this talk on what they were doing, and I think they'd hit like 50 million members maybe at that point in time, and just this rocket ship growth and how they were thinking about the role of something like LinkedIn in the kind of talent marketplace as it orientated to like professionals and networking. And I just left totally inspired. It was like 40-minute talk. I was like, this is incredible, and just started hitting up everyone on LinkedIn that I could find that worked at LinkedIn, and met a guy called Pat Trainer, and yeah, the rest is history, to be honest. So it was kind of one of these things where I wasn't looking to leave SHL, but the LinkedIn message was so compelling that I wanted to find out more. And again, when the kind of offer came, it was a tough decision to make because I had so many good relationships at that company, and everyone was like, yeah, social media, LinkedIn, it's a fad, we're not sure. And, it sends shivers down my spine to think that I may not have taken that role when I did, given the experience that I had there over 6 years and how many great people that I met. And so, yeah, just one of these things that I wanted to take a punt on. And thankfully it turned out in a really good way.
Nice. Awesome. So you moved into, that's a great story. You moved into the senior enterprise relationship manager role, looking after a bunch of customers around Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, back then it was like the London hub was like the EMEA presence, and I moved into a relationship manager role, and it's a new role. LinkedIn had just started to specialize away from like these hybrid type, customer sales professionals to more, of a new business relationship management, customer success type motion. And I went in at a relationship management level, and we were still trying to figure out the playbook for it and what that looked like. And, it was fun, but it was chaos at the time, right? Like hundreds of customers, no real process. But, just a great environment to be in as we figured that stuff out, and, new products coming to market and working through some of those challenges. But yeah, it was fun.
Awesome. There's a link between, no pun intended, but there's a link between the businesses that you've been across at, LPR, CEB, LinkedIn, Runway, and Envision. The businesses you've been across have been at extraordinarily different phases of the development growth of that particular business. I want to separate two things right now and ask you about, because I think these are two of your superpowers, and you've had a ton of exposure that other people can learn from. I want to separate two things: building great cultures and building and retaining world-class talent and great teams. So let's talk about building great cultures. How do you think about building culture? Maybe a set of principles or a framework that you use, or at least what's your mindset? And then I can dive into that a little bit. Yeah,
no, sure. I guess if I think about, LinkedIn, Runway, and Envision, like common theme across all of them is just like the purpose in those businesses, right? Like LinkedIn connecting, professionals to opportunity. Like, I think 600 million people on that platform. Like, the mission that they're sort of living every day is obviously great. Like, Runway's mission, really powerful around leveling the playing field for people in enterprises and giving people a voice on sensitive topics and access to mentorship, irrespective of what you look like or sound like in quite hierarchical cultures. And then like Envision, just this really powerful platform that's disrupting the way companies think about digital experiences, right? Like, every company in the world today is arguably a digital product company, whether you're in pharmaceutical or automotive or finance. Like, the user experience now via screens is like a huge differentiator for businesses in how they think about reorientating like what they're doing given like competitive landscape. So all of these companies, like, great missions, but I think about like the culture in these different phases of like really tying that to what you're trying to understand or achieve as a business. So if you think about Envision at the moment, where we've got this really exciting product used by 5 million designers around the world. Companies work with some of the biggest companies, like 100% of the Fortune 100. But we're still building an international, right? There's a lot of great things, but there's also challenging things that come with like growing a team at breakneck speed and adding people and changing process constantly. And so I think when you think about culture, you've got to pull in like the context of where you're at as a company and really think about like defining that with clear vocabulary so that people can understand like what it is the culture represents and like the types of behaviors that are going to help you succeed as a business. And so, you know, at Envision, we've gone through a company-wide exercise of like codifying the values and making sure that that's like integrated into how we define what it means to be at Envision and the types of things that are going to help you be great. And we've gone as far as like building that into how we do employee engagement and how we coach people and how we celebrate people. And so I would say like creating a vocabulary around the kind of culture and the values is like huge. You know, engage your teams, talk to your business stakeholders, find out like what it is you're trying to achieve as a company, and then use that context to define a set of language that people can really internalize and understand. And then think of ways in which you can bring that into everything you do. Like, this can't happen in a vacuum. Like, too many companies stick values up on the wall and they're great, but like no one remembers what they are. And so I think these businesses, you know, like LinkedIn, like Runway, like Envision, like in my experience, have all done a really good job of understanding like the power of culture and creating an environment where people can, you know, understand it and thrive in it and contribute to it. And I think that's, you know, an important part. Obviously, lots of learnings through those, you know, like Envision, we've grown so quickly, like we haven't got it all right over the last couple of years. But as you go through these, you know, as you go through these mistakes, you learn and you try and improve. And we've just got some great people here trying to figure this stuff out. So
that's great. So when you're thinking about, so you mentioned defining, putting together a set of language that's common across the organization and applying that to everything that you do. It sounds both one, intuitive and maybe not intuitive at the same time, but those are the steps and the elements that you think are very important within building that culture. Do you have any foundational things that managers and leaders need to do in order to proliferate that language and proliferate the documentation or the definitions you've put together for what the culture is and how to bring that to the people within their teams?
100%. Yes. I think the documentation is really clear, like clear definitions and as many examples that you can bring to what it means, the better, like real life examples of like people who are living certain, behaviors all the time. Right. And so how then you bring that into all aspects of like when you're recruiting people, like, are you identifying those types of behavioral qualities in the people that you're interviewing, and how are you doing that? And how can you make sure that that's consistent, right, through your hiring? Because again, like Envision's a great business and we're growing quickly, but it's not great for everyone, right? As sales professionals, like we're at a stage where we're growing at a pace where things break all the time, and you've got to embrace and love fixing that and building process and establishing like the fundamentals of the company, not just the selling part. And so how we make sure that as part of our values and how we interview, we identify people who perhaps have got brilliant talent and skill on the sales process, but perhaps aren't quite ready for the stage that we're at as a company where there's a build component too. That's really important. Like we need to set clear expectations for people coming into this company that there's so much that's good, but there's also some challenging stuff. And if you're not the type of person that wants to thrive in an environment where you're having to build things as you go and develop process and help contribute to the sort of foundational things that are going to help Envision grow in international, like it's not going to be a great fit and you're not going to enjoy our culture. But people that look at it and say, like, that's exactly where I want to be and I want to have an impact beyond simply the sale, that can obviously be quite exciting for some types of people. So document it, define it, integrate it into the types of people that you're looking to recruit. And then also like set a standard for, what great looks like in your company too. Like, how are people developing themselves against, those examples? How do we celebrate them in one-to-ones? It's got to be throughout everything, right? And if there are people living certain characteristics every day, like as a leadership team and as peers, we've got to create environments for them to celebrate and recognize each other for those, because it's those types of things I think just add to the quality of what we're doing culturally every day. So
awesome. So when you think about building great teams, what common things have you seen between LinkedIn and Envision that they do extremely well with building great teams and building high-performing teams?
So I'd say both organizations do a really strong job of like understanding what it is that they're offering, right? Like, what's the value proposition to an employee joining like LinkedIn? And in the same vein, like, what is it at Envision? And obviously they're two distinctly different organizations and those things will look different, but you've got to understand, like, what is it that you're offering someone and all of the great things, but I also think you've got to be like super clear on all of the challenges too, and make sure that as you're taking someone through a hiring kind of process, if they arrive on day one, like what they get in the hiring process is exactly what they feel and kind of have expected in that day one experience. So I think both companies do a really good job of like understanding that a little bit in the context of where they are. And again, we've made mistakes, over the last couple of years, built the team really quick. There's definitely things that we've learned over that process, but we've got to make sure that when we're looking for people, the types of people that we hire are going to thrive and love what it is that we have to offer. And that people that understand it and choose to opt out, that's completely cool as well. And so I think definitely some kind of pieces there. And then I think like Envision, and to a certain extent, I think LinkedIn did this well. Like, how do you bring your teams into that process too and give people a feel beyond, say, a hiring manager of like the different types of individuals? Like Envision's got some really strong individuals in our teams and they play a big part in our hiring process. If I think about the last few hires that I've made, part of the feedback that we got from them is they loved the sessions they got with people on my team, right? And that was a real opportunity for them to like dig in on what it's really like. And so I think bringing your employees into that experience and giving candidates that perspective through someone on your team's like experience is another powerful kind of tool for telling that story.
Yeah, let's actually pause on that for a minute and drill into it a little bit more. How are you actually doing that in the candidate experience?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess, we have set criteria through the process that we're interviewing people against. And so let's say a candidate gets to a stage where I've had a couple of conversations and they're doing really strong, but there's an area that I'd love us to continue to kind of dig in on. I'd provide that framework to someone on my team, give them all of the notes, the context, and they would then be equipped to go and have that conversation. But there'd also be a flavor of like, this is a two-way process. And I'm always pushing on candidates to kind of own this experience a little bit too. Like we can do what we can to share our perspectives, but they should be interviewing us as well. And I want candidates coming in eyed wide open to all of the great things and all of the challenges that we face. And I think setting those expectations and creating a framework for people to have them is a great way just to be transparent, give team access to the types of people I'm speaking to. And there's nothing better than an individual on the team coming back and saying, this person's absolute rock star, like, and having that kind of cultural validation.
That's great. And then you've mentioned multiple times around the candidate is choosing just as much as the company is choosing. And I've seen a couple of the things that you've written about, and you're talking about that two-way experience and the choices on both sides. The candidates have the power, the company has the power, reminding themselves that mutual evaluation process is extremely important. How are you asking questions or what types of questions or examples you're trying to get to make sure the candidate can make that evaluation themselves?
Yeah, no, great question. I guess just speaking openly about some of the specific challenges, right? Like if I think about our sales process here, the designer is so important in our company, right? Like the role of design in businesses, like we want to elevate that voice, and we see the role of design having more and more strategic influence in an organization in terms of like when an organization gets it right, like driving true business outcome. The designer is everything for us, but that's just one stakeholder and several that we have to work through. And our process, beyond simply a champion in design, also will have, a security component and a data privacy component and a legal component. Like the sales process can be long in some of the large organization, and it's complicated.
Yeah.
And then there are some of the cultural norms, like in Germany, for example, like cloud is still a new and challenging kind of technology for a lot of big businesses. And so some of our sales cycles in those markets take a lot longer, and therefore like the resilience to work through that time, but also the discipline to like manage the process and the stakeholders step by step and do all of those leading indicators up until the point that we're able to like work on a partnership with the customer and sign that off. Like those are certain qualities that not every sales environment will have. And I think the more that you can be specific about those types of things and look for evidence and examples of someone being able to kind of work through that in what they've done historically, but also like thrive and enjoy that type of thing versus, other sales cycles that might have fewer stakeholders and a less complicated kind of paper process. And so I think the more that you can be specific on examples in your process and bring that to life for an individual, like I'm almost looking for people to kind of opt in, sell them a little bit against it and see like where the fight is for like, no, this sounds exactly what I'm looking for, rather than overselling too much and, finding that some of this stuff becomes a shock to people.
I think that small and mid-sized tech businesses find it extremely hard to play the devil's advocate, like you just mentioned, within the candidate interviewing and recruitment process to make sure that they're telling them transparently, like, these are things that aren't rosy all the time, or these are the things that are really challenging that you may find difficult. There's two more things that I want to specifically discuss. One is around building and re-engineering a sales process so that it matches a customer-facing customer focus versus an internal focus. I think that you've gone through, in all likelihood, in two different businesses, both at LinkedIn and then maybe even more explicitly at Envision, where you've gone through a process of reevaluating and re-engineering some of that sales process. What would you say to people that are trying to build a customer-focused sales process and kind of the experience you've had of kind of engineering one towards that versus, focusing on yourself and your own internal process?
Yeah, so I think, if I take the Envision experience, Envision has this really powerful brand in design. Like we love the designer. We spend a huge amount of time going beyond our product to thinking about like how do we drive value in the community and elevate this new growing community in like businesses where design is now a differentiator for them. And so if I think about that community piece, we do things like Design Leadership Forum, which is a community for design leaders where we've got like 1,000 people around the world that we bring together for like these intimate dinners, and it's about like networking, and it's completely tool agnostic, but it's like, how do we create a platform for people that are going through rapid change in their organization where there's not a playbook for the type of growth that they're experiencing, the number of products they're having to design for, the number of stakeholders that they're having to collaborate with. And so I guess the first piece is like, how as a company do you recognize that you've got to drive value into the community that you serve beyond the products, right? To help just elevate the overall category and create best practice sharing and knowledge. So there's a piece around like, just making sure that you're heavily invested in that. And it's really inspiring to work at Envision because like the content that we produce and the investment that we make into helping these individuals like develop these new playbooks and scale their design teams and share their best practice, like that helps, right? I think from a kind of sales process point of view, because the product is so strong and that we started as this self-service business where 5 million people sign up to Envision and now use it to collaborate design ideas and stakeholders. A lot of the conversation sometimes in the earlier phase would start at a kind of product and feature level. And so one thing that we did to kind of help in that early phase of the process was we developed something we call it a value pyramid. Essentially, it's just like a research framework, right? That starts at the company's most strategic goal, breaks down what their strategic objectives are and challenges, and then ways in which we can create value for that. And it's an executive summary slide. It's really just a framework for researching what's this company talking about online that relates to digital and trends impacting their company, and how can we start every single conversation with a customer around those types of topics as part of the agenda, so that we're not being pulled straight into the products and features piece, but more into how what we do impacts real strategic business outcomes. And so that's kind of one thing that's really helped us elevate our conversations beyond the product, which is important and we want to do, but like connects us more to like what are companies actually facing in their organization and how does design play a role in fixing some of those things. That would be one example.
Yep. Good.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say another is like, how do you then design processes outside of the design persona for us also to create value, right? Like we have more engineers on the Envision platform now than designers, because so much of what's getting created in companies is like this design idea that needs to be socialized across so many different business functions, engineering being one, business stakeholders, legal, compliance, marketing. Like, how do you get as many people involved around the design idea as early in the process so the end outcome is that much better? So for us, it's like, how do we go to different types of personas and have that value-based conversation as well outside of design, so that we can speak to the value of this kind of operating system for all of their kind of digital products, kind of design, etc. And so lots of work around that. And the final thing, we've developed a kind of customer business review framework, which is really a template for ensuring that in our existing customers, we're sitting down at least once a quarter and having a conversation about what's new in their organization, what challenges they're facing as a function, and how we can bring value through the different things that we do. And so I think these types of tools just give our customer teams, more ammunition to spend more time on the customer than they do on us and our features and our products, etc. So
nice, that's great. Hey, one quick question to dive into a bit of detail on your review documents that you have with the customer. You've done so many of these with executives, both at LinkedIn and at Envision. Like as an individual, you have done so many. I know your team has too. Well, can you talk a little bit about what that document looks like, either the length of it or kind of like the summary of what's in it, just so people get a sense for kind of what you're including in that presentation?
Sure. Yeah. I guess, before even getting to the documents, so much of it is about what it is you're trying to achieve as the outcome of the meeting, right? And who needs to be there. So before you even get to the kind of document component, it's like, what stakeholders do I need to have in this conversation to ensure that we truly kind of move the conversation forward and are as connected as possible to the challenges that this business faces. So the preparation that goes into defining the stakeholders, selling the value of why bringing those different types of people together in a meeting, you win and lose in the prep and all of that piece, right?
Nice.
And so
you win and lose in the prep. That's a good one.
Yeah, exactly. So just make sure that this isn't a tick box exercise, but a truly strategic tool to figure out who needs to be there, why do they need to be there, and how do I communicate the value of these different functional leaders coming together to have a conversation around their company. And if you can get that piece right, selling the value of the meeting, getting the right stakeholders, prepping to ensure that the outcome that you're trying to kind of design for is the one that you reach, that's a huge part of it. The framework itself, I think orientate it around a clear agenda that's aligned to the outcome, make sure that a lion's share of the meeting is spent on the stakeholders and the individual challenges that they face and how those are barriers to the outcomes that they're trying to achieve as a company. If you can leave every single customer business review having understood the three core challenges that a company's facing and why are those barriers to them being successful, to be honest, that's a huge part of it, right? The rest kind of feels downhill. Obviously, the more insight you can bring to those conversations, insights driven from what the industry are doing, perhaps benchmark companies that they look to and see as really inspiring, whether that's in their industry peer group or outside of it, ensuring that you kind of gathered that insight as part of your prep and that you lead with that, particularly when you've got executives, key part of making ssure those types of engagements are successful.
Yep. Yeah. Awesome. The last thing I want to talk about is selling to power and selling to executives. You just gave me a great segue. Do you have a framework that you use or a set of principles that you use when you talk to executives in executive meetings? What sort of framework or set of principles are you using while you're setting up the agenda and having that conversation?
Yeah, I would say the first thing that always goes through my mind is to try and kind of look at the meeting from their perspective, to try and put myself in as much as what I think it is going on in their company. Again, from the research I've done, from the conversations I've had, a recent example of someone on my team, they're working with a large financial services organization. And over the last 6 months, I would say the conversations they've had across that organization with all types of stakeholders across the business and the time they've spent just listening and gathering insight and understanding, nothing to do with communicating what Envision does, but really what this business is trying to achieve and the barriers that are stopping them maybe reaching those things in the context of an annual report or anything else that you can find out about what they're doing strategically all of that enabled us to, when we sat down with the CMO, in 30 minutes, communicate more insight to that individual than perhaps he had been exposed to in a little while, right? And so I guess for me, like, you got to do the groundwork. Like, there's no point turning up to these executive meetings with like some sort of discovery conversation framework. Like, you get a short amount of time. They want to be educated. You've got to have some type of insight, and you've got to be super clear on the outcome that you want that individual. And so for us in that specific example, like, we wanted his sponsorship on something, and we were super clear about that and had earned the right to ask for it because we had turned up with a very clear vocabulary, framework, ask, and insight based on a ton of groundwork we've done in that business. And so for me, it's just like, do the research, do the prep, look at it from their perspective, know that they've got a short amount of time and could be talking to any type of vendor. And therefore, if they can't leave that room feeling like they've learned something or have got something clear that they can action, I would say, like, go back to the drawing board.
Nice. That's great. One quick follow-up to that. You mentioned prep and doing the pre-work multiple times in this conversation. How important is it to have something company specific versus more general, but that applies to their industry or their competitors?
Yeah, no, completely. I would say, firstly, it's about the stage in the process and the ask, right? So in the example that I gave to you, the ask was quite clear about like how we could help them with a recommendation about their organization. So it wasn't necessarily the start of a conversation where we were looking to like build a relationship. We had done a lot of stakeholder engagement across lots of functions at a quite senior level, like C-1 or 2 in some cases. Mm-hmm. And in this example, it was like, here's our recommendation. Here's how it's been validated across all of these people with all of this business case. Will you support it? Nice. So that I would say in that stage is a different type of executive engagement where you need to have done the groundwork. In an earlier stage where perhaps the executive engagement is more at the beginning of a process where you're looking to start top down and go straight in at that level, I think any type of insight that is anchored in like what you know about the company, what you know about the industry, what you know about their benchmark peers is really strong. Like if you're at the beginning of something and your ask is maybe like introductions to more people on their team or them to work with you on a specific problem that you solve really well as a company, I think that's a different type of ask, but equally requires the same amount of prep, right? And I kind of go back to like, what's the size of prize and what is it you're trying to achieve in the context of the goals that you have? And if this is something that you genuinely believe with this person is going to move your business forward, there's no amount of time frame on the prep that in my mind is not worth doing. Right. If you truly want to meet the outcome and you've decided that that's like a key priority for you. So yeah.
Nice, man. Great answer. Okay. DSG, you've been excellent with your time. Let me run through some rapid fire questions and then we'll wrap up. Is that okay?
Go for it. Yeah.
Cool. Your favorite place to snowboard in the world? What is it?
Tahoe, dude. Easy.
Tahoe. Nice. That was so fast. Why Tahoe?
I've just got so many great memories there. Like I learned to board in Tahoe, and it became for me and just a group of friends, like somewhere that we would try and go at least once a year as part of like kickoffs that we did and stuff like that. And so I've just got so many great memories of like learning to board there, great days on the slopes, hanging out with friends. Like, yeah, it's absolutely awesome.
Oh, love it. Okay. Second question, best food city in the world?
Oh,
I saw you.
London.
Okay. That's such a cheating answer. It's so cheeky that you would say that. Love it. Love it. Okay, cool. Your best one or two interview tips for someone that is going into interview for a role soon?
I would say research the person that you're interviewing with. Look at the company. There's so much available online now to individuals. Like there's no excuse for it, right? So Glassdoor reviews, LinkedIn, people that work there, people with similar job titles, like who invests in the company, what sort of portfolio do they have, who's on the board. Like, to be honest, like there's so much available to everyone now. And so I would say all aspects of those things would be really important.
Cool. Awesome. Do the prep. And then last question is around overcoming age in senior roles. Any advice for making that an asset versus a liability? A lot of people I know I asked a question similar to this, but any either general advice or advice to those that are younger with a lot of responsibility?
I would just say be yourself, acknowledge gaps. From my point of view, again, like there's still so much that I have to learn and improve on. And I think just be comfortable with that, right? Whether you're managing people that have more experience than you or not, whether you work in an environment where your peer group, find common ground with people and just embrace like who you are, and take kind of a level of enjoyment in like what others bring to the conversation too. So I think as long as you're not trying to be something that you're not, then you'll be absolutely fine, in my opinion.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for listening. If you appreciated and enjoyed the episode, go ahead and make a comment on the post for the episode on LinkedIn. If you love the Naberhood podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give us a 5-star review on iTunes. Until next time, go get it.